Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and for the next little build I've decided to make, it is another cast on crit bow character, and I do like to make these as Pathfinders typically, simply because they've got good movement speed and you can sustain flasks quite comfortably with them, and I prefer to reserve my assassins for some other niche builds that really feel the power of Assassin just a little bit better, although sometimes it is still a cast on crit character. In any case, this is a bow cast on crit that is trying to scale projectiles rather than area like I did in my previous one. So we're trying to go here with Ice Spear and Blazing Salvo. And you can also see the big blue fiery balls coming down. That's also Firestorm with the Stygian microtransaction. So we've thrown that into an Asenath's chant for good measure. That's a helm that just lets you cast every time you attack with bows. And it just helps a bit on clear. But the idea is that I'm trying to scale with projectiles, Dying Sun, to get both Ice Spear and Blazing Salvo doing a lot of our damage, because those things do benefit from more projectiles since they technically shotgun in a way. If the more projectiles that you have from that one cast hit the enemy, the more damage that will be dealt. So if you add projectiles to both Ice Spear and Blazing Salvo, it should increase your single target damage. And you can see I've also been toying around with Glacial Cascade in the helm instead, simply because Firestorm is quite a visual mess. And it's kind of hard to keep track of what's going on when you've got a lot of those going out. But turns out Glacial Cascade is actually pretty nice anyway, because it shoots out a lot more instantly and freezes things. So for the most part, I think our clear setup here is with Glacial Cascade because it's a lot safer and gets pretty decent instant kill potential going, while Firestorm is probably more of a single target setup. Though I'm still in the testing phase of that, haven't really gone across too many enemies that survive for very long, except for a Mastermind, which don't have footage of. It's just like a boring fight. In any case, it is kind of just still in preliminary testing, and ultimately, if you want to play a cast on crit bow character, I think the previous one I did is still your best bet. It's the Bladeful Blade Blast. There's just really no outscaling those skill combos because they're just so powerful and get use out of gear quite heavily. But the problem is, I did make that one in Harvest, and it's potentially fairly gear heavy, gear intensive, or at least there's a high ceiling for you to min-max towards. So if you do want to go into a cast on crit bow and pick that one, it's probably going to take a bit more currency than this thing, which really didn't cost almost anything. Just had to spend a couple of exalts trying to get lucky on a bowcraft, which I'll show you shortly. But it's a fairly cheap setup, and it's potentially not going to be the best cast on crit bow I've ever done, but we're just still experimenting and seeing if Blazing Salvo can have a place in the game at the moment, at least in an automated setup. I've heard decent things from the totems and the self-cast Blazing Salvos, so trying to incorporate it into some cast on crit, see if it works, and see if it is worth doing. But so far, so good on the character. It's just another typical bow cast on crit, which runs around pretty fast, shoots out a fuck ton of spells really nicely. You try and get some life gain on hit, so spell life gain on hit on your rings, and that should typically give you some good sustain. And then it just, as always, feels really nice to play a Pathfinder because your flask management, your flask sustain is damn near infinite. You just get to mash away and constantly feel safe knowing that you have all of your flasks up, which is kind of an issue for me in Heist, in between packs, or in between doors and stuff. I might run out of flasks because I've been like overly mashing them defensively, whereas with Pathfinder, not really an issue. You just mash your flasks all day, every day, and you've always got 100% uptime on your defensiveness. One other thing to mention is I'm using a new chest, which I'll show you in just a second, called the Admiral, which takes advantage of elemental equilibrium for this build. Since you can't really justify regular elemental equilibrium with this, since there's so many overlapping spells, you'll probably run into some resistance issues. With the Admiral, it actually just lets you pretty much always take full advantage of it, and that takes care of our skills, penetration and negative resist properties, so that we actually deal some damage. So that's the build so far. I'll get into how I've built it so far so you can see the gear and the actual intricacies of the setup. There's my character at this point, level 88, called Giving my bitrate the cock. Bitrate, yeah, it's pretty bad with Twitch streaming when you're doing the entire shenanigan of this type of build. But it's not too bad with Glacial Cascade, as I mentioned. So these typical cast on crit bow builds are based around a bow that has the cast on crit support. Now, if you're new to cast on crit, basically what you need is an attack that is supported by cast on crit, and then a spell. So in this case, it's Blazing Salvo and Ice Spear, which will rotate when they actually crit. So every single time you crit with your barrage, it will cast these on the crit. It is, of course, with a cooldown, because cast on crit has an internal cooldown. And then you can see with the Asenath's Chant Helm, trigger a socketed spell when you attack with a bow. That also has a cooldown. Currently, it is 0.3 cooldown time. At the top right there it says. So you can fire off 3 of these a second if you're attacking fast enough with the barrage. And like I mentioned, I am sometimes, and for most of the time so far on this character, using Anomalous Firestorm, which just makes our initial hit harder, the big firestorm that comes down, the big meteor, and that's a bit more for a clear setup, but it still does seem to have maybe some good single target potential. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But it is a bit slower because, as you can see, it has to like fly down from the sky, whereas Cascade just hits instantly, and also has full fizz to cold conversion, so it's pretty good for your clear. So currently with Cascade, I've got Inspiration, Hypothermia, and Crit Strikes. Since the Cascade base crit is only 5, I want to make sure we're getting those crits and shattering in. Whereas with Firestorm, it's Spell Cascade, because you do want the extra firestorms to be coming out. So that's shooting out 3 at a time instead of the regular just 1. So Spell Cascade is pretty good in that setup, but got to make sure it's actually overlapping on bosses to be doing an increase in damage. And on some, it just plain won't. Whereas the setup in the bow is currently on a 5-link. It is Barrage, GMP, because we do want both Blazing Salvo and Ice Spear to get that extra sort of projectiles, though at this point it might not be worth it. I might want to get another support gem in here, since I do have more projectile scaling from Dying Sun, and Blazing Salvo already has 6 projectiles, so an additional 4 here, additional 3 there is maybe going to be a bit more overkill than we want, and possibly just want more damage as opposed to more projectiles. And the reason I say 3 for Dying Sun is it typically says 2. But if you get over 50% flask effect, so flasks applied to you have 5% effect, if you get over 50%, then it gives you a 3rd projectile. As you can see here, fires 9 arrows sequentially. It will now say fires 12 arrows sequentially. And we have 20% there. We have 8% over here from Arcane Chemistry. The little cluster jewel, the medium cluster jewel with a spiked concoction, gives you Alchemist Genius, which is 20% effect of flasks, and then just a little bit on the belt, which is 5%, and that puts us all over 50% just slightly. So that's how you get another projectile on Dying Sun as a Pathfinder, at least anyway. And then Alchemist is pretty nice, just some flask charge generated and some effect, and then we've also got a little life node here. That's what this medium does, and then we just got a life node over here as well. So besides that, the interesting stuff is that we're using Elemental Equilibrium. So whenever you hit an enemy with a certain type of damage, so let's just say in this case cold and fire, it will make the enemy weak to lightning. So with the Admiral, it says elemental damage you deal with hits is resisted by lowest elemental resistance instead. So if the enemy is currently weak to lightning, it's minus 50 to lightning, all of your damage is going to get applied off of that minus 50 to lightning, including the cold and fire. So the idea with this sort of chest and setup is to never have all 3 damage types going off on any one attack. So this currently does fire and cold, so it's always going to make things weak to lightning. Our Cascade only deals cold, so it's going to make things weak to fire and lightning. If we hit with Blazing Salvo, it's fire and cold, so it always makes things weak to lightning. And then Ice Spear is just pure cold, so it always makes things weak to fire and lightning. And the idea is you need to have at least one of those minus 50s going off for the Admiral to give benefit to all of your damage. It's a pretty cheap chest. It doesn't really have many defensive properties like life, so it is a bit difficult to shoehorn into a build. I'm currently still working on trying to get a bit more life. At least 5k would be nice, but more than that would be ideal, since Pathfinder really benefits from sustain. So the higher life you have, the better you're going to sustain through a fight, because you can recover really quickly and you can also just keep chugging flasks. So we're trying to get a bit of sustain with 14 life gain on hit here from spells. I tried to get a similar one here, but no such luck. The ideal situation is life gain on hit here, life gain on hit there, and also using a Watcher's Eye. I've currently just got a crit one with Zealotry, but if you get a Watcher's Eye with the Vitality 30 life gain on hit, that applies to both your Barrage, projectiles, and also all of your spells. So a Watcher's Eye with the Vitality life gain on hit is huge sustain, which should basically take you from 0 to 100% like instantly off of most of your procs. It is a little bit more expensive, and I didn't want to force the narrative that you need to have it, so I'm not using it. But that would be the ideal situation. And then you wouldn't, just with the Vitality Watches, you wouldn't really even need any over here, because that is a lot by itself. As far as the rest of the gear, we've got Temple Gloves with damage hits against chilled enemies, some belt, bit of res, just make sure you got a spare prefix to put on Flask Effect, some corrupted boots with movement speed and stuff. I crafted that just by, Jesus, what did I do? A little bit of essence, actually. It was an Essence of Scorn, and it had a catalyst on there before of life and mana, so like trying to promote the life and the life gain on hit rolls. Just bought this one for a few C. Get to the talisman in a sec. Crappy leveling quiver, might still upgrade that, and I'll get to that in a sec as well. But for this one, I do recommend, if you're going for a build at the moment that, you know, still needs an amulet that doesn't need any special influence properties, to look for talismans to begin with. Because at the moment, with the current way talismans drop in Heist with the Anoints, there's a shitload of really good talismans out there with the Anoint or an Anoint you might want, and they're cheap as fuck. So just a really solid amulet like this with Arcane Chemistry, which is this one, and I really do quite like that. Saves me a golden oil at the very least. This is like 5 chaos, and there's a lot of decent amulets like that. So look for some stats that you want, like life, crit multi, and then try and look for a specific anoint that you want and see what's available. You might just come across the amulet of your dreams with an anoint already on there, and in some cases an actual useful talisman implicit out there, and it's going to be a lot cheaper than crafting or buying another one otherwise. As for the bow, you still sort of craft these in a very similar fashion to before, but it's just, you know, alt regal crafting. What you do is grab a shaper bow, and then you basically alteration until you see crit, cast on crit, attack speed double damage, +1 socket, pretty much any of those, and then regal it. And if you happen to get 2 of the mods you want, great, craft another one, you're pretty much done. Because the important stuff here is cast on crit, and then ideally some attack speed. Everything else is kind of marginal. If you get like crit and attack speed with the cast on crit, that's already a great start, and it's pretty damn good. This one specifically I made by getting +1 and crit multi. I then regaled it, got fire res, I then blocked attack rolls, so we said cannot roll attack mods, and it's got 2 spare prefixes at that point, And if I Exalt Slam, I've got a pretty damn good chance of hitting cast on crit. So that's how I ended up making this one. It took me 4 Exalts to make total, which, you know, currently pretty cheap. So if you want to do it that way, you need to have a little bit of luck on your side, because hitting the cast on crit isn't a guarantee. It is just, you know, a decent chance. Or you could start with the cast on crit, do cannot roll attack, and end up making something like this anyway. If you want the +1 or the Fizz as a cold. Fizz as cold isn't super important to me. It's good for Cascade, but if I'm using Firestorm, it does nothing. And ultimately, it isn't something we wanted. It just happened to happen, but you could do it on the Bladefall, Blade Blast build either way. As for the rest of the gems, we've got Ice Golem, Assmark, Herald of Ice. We self-cast the Assmark on just single targets. Nothing too special going on there. Precision, Zealotry, Vitality, Blood Rage. Only got Vitality at this level at the moment, so it helps cancel out Blood Rage a bit. And then my chest currently is Flame Wall and Arcane Surge. Flame Wall is pretty decent because it does give our Blazing Salvo and our Ice Spear bonus damage when we pass through it. As you can kind of see, it just shoots a lot more fiery shit out the other end. Righteous Fire, just for Var Righteous Fire. Second Wind and Dash. And then Void Sphere. So that's just to suction some enemies in. And I've already gone over that setup. Bit of accuracy and crit and attack speed on crit in the dual socket there. And I'm still working on getting a Cinder Swallow flask to replace this one, because currently just a silver flask. As far as the passive tree is concerned, nothing really to say. We're trying to pick up crit, trying to pick up spell crit, trying to pick up life, and it's just kind of all over the place. Yep. But that's all I got to say for now, I guess. If you are interested in the microtransaction, that's what the default chest looks like. It's a nice, clean, I don't know, Admiral look. Grabbed the new hat, the just little witch's hat, and I don't know, some bow. So yeah, nothing too special going on there. Bit of a clean look. That's it for this video. Hopefully we've got good news to report in the end game by next one. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.